For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Scholes. I'm the county manager, and I appreciate all of you being here today for this presentation. And thanks to Johnson County for actually coming down here to brief us or give us some information that we can use this morning to perhaps develop a strategy for Sedgwick County and all the municipalities contained therein. But this is kind of one of those things. If you followed the Sedgwick County budget this year, this was, a hot topic for us. We actually added some money into the budget for a few different things. In our solid waste fee, we added stormwater contingency money to provide in terms of emergency for storms or events, the potential to use money to help mitigate the effects of that storm. We also added positions for David in Public Works to provide more personnel for stream maintenance and also equipment, which will help. And just recently, they're south of Derby. They actually did finished up work of where they had about 520 dump truck loads of debris that they have cleared out of a stream south of Derby. So they continue to do great things, but their list is long, and now they have a couple more people and more equipment to continue to clear out streams in the county. But also what was great is the commissioners, and we do have 4 commissioners in the room. We have the chairman, Dave Unruh. We also have Commissioner Richard Ranzau from District 4. We have Commissioner David Dennis from District 3, and then we have Commissioner Jim Howell from District 5. So this is a high topic, a very important issue for all the commissioners. I know Commissioner O'Donnell, who's not here, may come, but he's dealing with a potential issue with water contamination, obviously in his district, and he has his district has a meeting tonight on that. So we just have a lot going on, and a lot of it has to do with water. But part of the budget item that the commissioners insisted being in the budget this year was a line item to actually use to help us, or help me, the staff, and really develop a coalition across the county to help figure out how we can get a new revenue stream to be able to support stormwater maintenance, stormwater infrastructure, whatever that is, a strategy to be able to do that. So they actually allocated some planning dollars in our budget to do that. So not only do we have money to be able to do the staff analysis, we also, in order to get this group together, need to know what to do. So this is kind of a way for us to do a SWOT analysis and figure out some of the ways that we could just be thinking about before we start really rolling up our sleeves and getting to it. I again thanks everybody for coming, and what I'll do right now is I'll kick it to Susan, and she'll get into the agenda for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. As Mike said, I appreciate all of you coming today. A few housekeeping in order. You know where the refreshments are. Restrooms are out this door and straight down the hall on your right. Or if you go out to the right and come around to the back, there's some additional restrooms. We will hear about stormwater. It's a very important issue. As you know, a lot of economic impact happens from flooding, and it happens right now. You can see it every night on TV from the hurricane. Luckily, we don't get 50 inches of rain in a few days, but we do have flooding problems in our communities. We built a levee around the west side of Wichita back in the 50s to help alleviate some of the flooding issues that we had in downtown Wichita and surrounding areas, but that didn't help all of the county or all of the communities. I was one community here in Sedgwick County that has received a 500-year flood and 2 100-year floods in the same year. So we know there's economic impact. We know there are issues. The question is, what studies may still need to be done to help determine the areas of concern, and realize that you have one community doing something upstream may affect the community downstream adversely. So we need to look at this as a whole to make sure we're doing the right thing. And that's why we have experts here with us today. Instead of reinventing the wheel, we can look at what another community in Kansas has done. Johnson County has been addressing stormwater issues for decades, and we're here to learn about funding and implementation and hear what they have to offer us. So Lee Kellenberger is the stormwater program manager from Johnson County, and he's going to talk to you first. Then we'll have a Q&A session and a break, and then Sarah Smith will get a little bit more in detail about how they address stormwater issues. So please help me welcome Lee Kellenberger.
Thank you, Susan. Can you guys hear me on this mic? Okay. I always feel like I have to bend over on these kind of mics. So if you guys can hear me, give me a thumbs up. All right. Thank you, Susan, and thank everyone for the opportunity. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to come down here and share our story today. We don't get asked to do this that much, so it kind of makes me put pen to paper and actually kind of write things down and document it. So it actually is a good exercise for me to kind of update it, keep a PowerPoint updated. It's been a few years since I've done this, so bear with me. I'm going to try to walk you through kind of the evolution of our program in Johnson County. But first, I want to say this is an awesome facility. This is really top-notch here. We didn't know what to expect, but when we walked in here, you can see this is first class. So a little bit about myself before I begin. I'm a transplant from Iowa, grew up in the cornfields of north central Iowa. Came to Kansas in 1998 to attend KU, go Jayhawks, and ended up, getting my undergrad, my master's there. While I was in college, I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey as a hydrotech, and so I covered the majority of the state doing stream gauging and collecting field data, and found my specialty was in collecting reservoir sedimentation data, so doing core sampling in the reservoirs and bathymetry to estimate reservoir sedimentation and storage loss. So that's where I kind of fell in love with water. During my master's studies, I took a course in urban hydrology, and that's how I got stuck doing stormwater. So it's something I'm very passionate about. I've been with Johnson County now for 12 years. I started out as the project manager, and I'm now the program manager. So over the next hour or so, I don't know, I haven't really timed myself. This may only take 30 minutes, so if I'm going too fast, or feel free to stop me. I plan to kind of walk you through the evolution of our program. I know a little bit from what Susan has said, how you guys have had an active board and now it's not so active, and these issues come up from time to time. So we haven't always had this program in existence. So I'm going to kind of show you from where we started and how we got to where we're at today. And in taking you through it, I mean, my goal is basically you guys find something relevant that you can maybe bring home to your programs and here in the county. Just for a show of hands, how many elected officials do we have? Okay, quite a few. All right. I assume the rest are county and city staff mostly. Okay. Normally we start off these kind of presentations with our vision and mission statement, but we found that our elected officials kind of like something more visual. So we upped our game and we put together a little video that may play well with you as well, this audience as well. So this is kind of our latest vision and mission for Johnson County. What do you think? Better than a vision and mission statement? It's a little bit cheesy, a little bit promotional, but it does kind of capture the essence of what our program is today. We really are public safety, economic vitality, health and safety to our residents. So I included a couple of slides here and maps and some statistics for the county. For those of you that might not be familiar with it, it's a metropolitan, or it's a suburb, it's a bedroom community to Kansas City. Obviously, we're part of a larger metropolitan area. But our residents, we do community surveys every other year or so. And the things that come in top are probably the same things here. Safety, public safety, schools, jobs, good place to raise kids. So that's really what our commission is all about. Recent major investments in the county that we have on the books are going to be embarking on here in the next year or so. Or we're building a new county courthouse. We have some major upgrades to our wastewater treatment facilities on the book to the tune of about $260 million just for one plant. We're opening a new Arts and Heritage Center, just opened this summer, and we're developing several new county parks. So those things are on the front and center of our residents' minds. Stormwater might not be so much so until it rains. We have about 70,000. I looked at latest statistics I saw. We have about 70,000 more residents than Sedgwick County. So we're right there neck and neck. We are a little bit more populous than Sedgwick, but we're essentially the same in population. You'll see here that we have 20 cities, 20 different municipalities in the county. Another way to look at that is, the way I typically look at it is on a watershed basis, 18 different watersheds, typically covering 3 major river basins. We're lucky in that we really don't receive any run-on from adjacent communities. We're kind of at the top of the hill. These watersheds down here, Big Bull, Little Bull, these all flow to the south, to the Meridazine River. These watersheds here on the east side of the county, this third, flows east into Kansas City, Missouri through the Blue River. And then these watersheds here flow north to the Kansas River. So that's kind of nice. We sit at the top of the hill. We don't have a lot of run-on from our neighboring communities. I also included some financial statistics in here since I knew we were going to be talking about funding today. Median income, low unemployment rate, and this figure here, retail sales, because that's going to come into play. We talk about our funding source. Our 2012 retail sales was about $10.5 billion. So let's see, what's next? Oh, for those scientists in the room, I'm not an engineer, actually. I'm a hydrologist. So I'm interested in the water. And for those of you that are, I thought I'd throw in a slide here to show what our annual climate was like. As you know, precipitation varies widely across Kansas. So on an average year, we receive about 40 inches of rain. I checked, depending on what gauge you look at here in Sedgwick County, one I saw was about 34 inches. So we just get about 6 more inches of rain on average than you guys do. I don't know if you followed the weather this year, but we received about 30 inches just in July and August this year. So we've had a pretty wet year, an above normal precipitation year for us for sure. You're going to see this timeline throughout my presentation today as I walk you through the evolution of our program. It's kind of a good timeline, and I marked out some key events in our history here. So we're going to continue to refer back to this, and again, it's background to our program. Maybe you guys can see some of the keystones along the way that you guys might try to avoid, or that you might want to try to start sooner than later. So we got our start back in the early 90s, actually 1990, in fact. Just prior to that, the Kansas legislature passed a bill, House Bill 271, that authorized counties to implement a 1/10 of a cent tax for stormwater. And it's no coincidence that Johnson County adopted this tax. In fact, persistent flooding in northeast Johnson County actually led the mayors, several mayors from Johnson County, to contact and work with their state legislative representative to actually draft this legislation. So it was that Johnson County initiated the bill, worked with their legislator to get it into the House and approved that year. And we subsequently adopted the tax. So that's how our funding source, it's a retail sales tax 1/10 of 1 cent. Unfortunately, there was only a 3-year window to authorize this sales tax. So you couldn't go do it today. You couldn't implement this today without some other enabling legislation, I believe. Or at least this ship has sailed on this one. So subsequently, our Board of County Commissioners created the Stormwater Management Program, which is the county side of this program. That's where Sarah and I work at the county, and we really administer the funding. And they also created then, the Board of County Commissioners created our Stormwater Management Advisory Council, and it's an advisory board to our county commission that is comprised of representatives, one voting representative from all 20 cities. Each city gets 1 vote. It's not based on population, land area, anything. The smallest city, that's Westwood Hills, maybe 5 city blocks, has the same vote as Overland Park that, comprises, over half of our population. So it's a 1-to-1. That's the way the board was set up, and it's been that way ever since. Let's see. Passage of this sales tax, and I wanted to touch on this, was simply an action taken by our Board of County Commissioners. There was no vote of the people. I was asked, go into how you got buy-in on this. Once the tax was passed, we entered into interlocal agreements with the cities who wanted to participate in the program, and it was pretty easily. We simply called them up, said, hey, we have a new funding source to help you address stormwater. You guys want to participate? They all said, sure. All 20 cities signed on. Why wouldn't you want to? So we had it easy, and I trust me, I know how fortunate we are to have this funding source today, and the things that we've been able to do with it. So what does a 1/10 of a cent sales tax generate in Johnson County? I thought since we had some elected officials, you guys might be interested in some numbers. Here's what the numbers look like. Back in the early 90s, the program was bringing in just a couple $1 million. And in 2018, we're estimating it to bring in just over $15 million. So it takes $15 billion worth of retail sales to generate $15 million of sales tax income. I think in Sedgwick County, you guys have, I think the same tax would generate about $7 billion, I think is what I was thinking. So about half of what Johnson County. We're fortunate in that we have a lot of retailers in Johnson County, I guess. So it works well for us. A couple of things to point out here. We're in the 27th year of our program. And coincidentally, the tax revenue has brought in $270 million. So it's averaged, if you average that out over 27 years, $10 million a year is what the tax has brought in. I'll also, if I haven't mentioned it, I'll probably mention this and hit home on it, that this is dedicated funding. Our commission can't, at their whim, take this money and use it for the courthouse next year, or take it and put it towards wastewater treatment facilities. The way the legislation was written is these funds are dedicated for stormwater management and flood control. So as a staff person, you know how nice that is. You don't have to go up and try to compete every year on your annual budgeting process for these dollars. They can't touch it. We go up there with our recommendation from our advisory council. The commissioners look it over. They have a high level of confidence in our program. It's been very successful, and it's authorized virtually every year. So, and finally, it's a growing source of revenue. It may not be growing as quickly as we would like, but you can see that at least it's growing. You notice the peak there in 2007, just before the economic recession. We were hit hard just like everyone else from that. It took us about 8 years to get back to the pre-recession funding levels, and looks like we're still again on the upward path. So back to the early 90s, we have a new fledgling program with a dedicated funding source and 1 FTE, a program manager. But before we could start funding these projects, we needed to define what qualifies as a project. What does this look like? And how would we prioritize the funding of those projects? So I'm not going to get into all the specifics of that. A lot of that's going to be details going to be in Sarah's presentation next. But basically, we we developed what we refer to our administrative policies and procedures. And kind of some of the highlights of those procedures, policies and procedures, it's really only about a 10-page document. It's not lengthy at all, and these are kind of the highlights. First and foremost, they came up with a priority-based funding distribution. This is not a jurisdictional-based program. It doesn't say, okay, Overland Park, you get X number of dollars per year, or it's not an equity-based program at all. So it's not based on political boundaries other than the county. It's a need-based program. We just put the dollars where the need is, where the needs have been identified. And that's the way they set it up, and we've never had any pushback on that. I'll get into later some of the pitfalls of that approach and some of the things that we're looking at doing in the future. So next is our cost benefit formula. We needed some way to prioritize or rank those projects. Benefit points are assigned to the projects based on the number of homes that flood or the number of streets that flood and the severity and frequency at which those flood to generate a point total. And we'll get into that more, but basically a project needs to score 100 points in order to be eligible for program funding. We just divide that by the total, divide the total cost, estimated cost of the project by the benefits, and we come up with our cost benefit formula, and we rank them accordingly. We fund those with the highest cost benefit first. Let's see. Interlocal agreements are required for the projects. And this is key because the city in which the project is located is responsible for the construction and administration of the project. So we enter into ILAs with all the cities to construct the projects. They also set it up in that there was a program match. So for every dollar spent from the program, or every 75 cents, every dollar spent on a project, 75 cents is coming from the county, 25 cents is coming from the city. So 75-25 cost share on these projects. And they also made it clear that the local match, the 25%, needs to come from city funds. It can't be a state or federal grant or revenue source. So if they did have a grant or federal match on a project, that would come off the top. We would share in that cost savings as well, and it would lower the total project cost, and then we would 75-25 split the remainder. Minimum design criteria. We needed some sort of level of some sort of standard level of design. We chose APWA, our local Kansas City chapter of APWA, 5600 drainage criteria, and we had to pass the 100-year or 1% chance storm event. So all projects have to be designed to a certain level of standard. The program staff does a minimal review of the design drawings before they're bid for construction, just a cursory review though, and then the projects are owned by the city after they're constructed, and they're responsible for the ongoing maintenance. So, let's see, where am I? Oops. Apologize here. I'm going to get my notes to come up. Just a couple more items I wanted to highlight. One thing you might notice on here is kind of the lack of responsibility for the county to do much, and that was by design. Cities were responsible for pursuing funding, initiating the projects, the implementation of those, and the ongoing maintenance. The county was basically just administering the program and writing the checks in the very early years, and that was by design, because we really didn't know how extensive our flooding was. Remember, this was initiated by 3 or 4 communities in northeast Johnson County that there was areas of known flooding problems. So we didn't really know how long this stormwater sales tax was going to be needed. In fact, in around the late 90s, that was the conversation that this program staff and the communities were having. What should we fund next? They were thinking that maybe they had solved all their flooding problems. Participation was beginning to fade. Cities weren't bringing forward any new projects, and there was actually discussion of sunsetting the tax back in about 1996, 97, 98. They were thinking, you know what, this was worked great for 8 years. We kind of have our problem solved. And they didn't really know what to do next. Keep in mind, we didn't have the sophisticated floodplain models back then, or even digital floodplain maps. The current effective paper FEMA floodplain maps were from 1970. Well, probably like Sedgwick County, a lot of development occurred between 1970 and 1998. So those maps were essentially useless. But the cities were doing the best they could back then by simply reacting to flooding problems after it occurred. The problem with this approach, as you know, is that if it doesn't rain for a while, you don't really know where to look next. So, and when a flood does occur, we all kind of look like idiots. Like, well, why weren't you doing more beforehand? You know, so they got to thinking, you know, the next two things that the program chose to do really changed the course of our future. So for the first 10 years, 8 years or so, it was just a reactionary program, flooding known area, fixing areas of known flooding. Maybe we'd get another storm and another area would pop up, we'd fund that. But they were doing nothing proactive. We really didn't know where to look. We didn't have updated floodplain models or maps. And enter our floodplain mapping update initiative. The stormwater program staff and SMAC decided to invest program money, and this is the first time it really went to anything other than projects. They decided to invest that money into a countywide floodplain remapping effort with FEMA. More accurately, we defined the current and future conditions, hydrology conditions, and then used high-quality topography data to map our floodplain boundaries up to the 160-acre tributary area. FEMA regulatory stops at 640. We took them all the way up to 160 acres of tributary area. Obviously, this allows us to now better identify, not only identify our existing flooding problems, but also project future flooding conditions in the future as more development occurs. In total, the effort took 10 years and $10 million, roughly is the kind of number we use. I know that seems like a large number, but we decided to do it all at once. I think we had 8 major watersheds. We broke the county up into 8 major watersheds and did all 8 studies kind of concurrently. That was probably a huge deal and a big undertaking. You wouldn't have to do them all at once, obviously. I said $10 million. It was probably the best $10 million out of the $270 million that the program has ever spent. Sure, it was hard, and we added a lot of people to the floodplain. We took some out some places, and we added a lot of people to the floodplain. We had to go through countless public meetings and education with our homeowners. Why is the floodplain elevations changing? How did they get bigger? And we had to explain all that to them. But it was a service, I think, to our communities, showing them what the risk is, that they should now buy flood insurance, but by mapping the future conditions, we have no way of telling this, but think of how many additional people we've prevented now from ever constructing anything in the floodplain. So that really was a great investment of our dollars. I can't stress enough how important it was for us to do those watershed studies to show not only the current flooding conditions, but project out what the future conditions might look like. And for the first time ever, we could proactively address flooding problems before they occurred. We knew where the flooding was. We could work with the city to say, look, when it does rain next, this is what's going to happen based on model conditions. So we fund projects based on documented flooding, but also mapped flooding. Let's not wait for the flooding to happen. If our models show that flooding will occur there, given a certain duration and event, we'll go ahead and fix the project preemptively before the flooding occurs. So we're able to get out in front of development also. And this was really a shift from our program, from being a reactive-based program to a proactive-based program. The second event that changed the course of our future was a major storm that occurred on October 4th, 1998. Some of you might remember it from the nationally televised Chiefs-Seahawks game. It's kind of a coincidence I'm down here today on the season opener for the Chiefs. But the area received about a little over 4 inches of rain in about 2 hours on top of already saturated soil conditions, and it resulted in severe flash flooding. We had 11 fatalities in the Kansas City area, 10 of those in Kansas City, 1 in Johnson County. And it still ranks as the second deadliest flash flooding event or flooding event in Kansas City history, only behind the September 11th, 1977 event, which claimed 29 lives on the Brush Creek Plaza, on the Country Club Plaza. In total, damage estimates were just over $50 million back then. And as you can imagine, a significant number of flooding locations that were previously unknown were identified during that event. The major watersheds affected were Brush Creek, Indian Creek, and Blue River. So with the floodplain mapping effort underway, the event in 1998, any talk of, in the aftermath of this event, any talk of sunsetting the tax was quickly went away. We definitely knew we had more work to do. So the program started growing. We actually added our second FTE, a project manager position, bringing the total number of employees at the county to 2. The total number, our list of projects eligible for future funding was at an all-time high. And it was about this time that staff and the Stormwater Management Advisory Council decided that it might be a good idea to develop or to go through a kind of a strategic planning effort to make sure the program was still on the right track. I mean, we had a lot was going on then with the program. And at a minimum, we thought it might be a good idea to develop a vision and a mission in case anyone like a commissioner ever asked us what it was we were doing or where we were headed with this program. So we completed our first strategic plan in 2002, and for the first time, we really had a roadmap for the future. This program, or this plan, it just kind of basically reaffirmed the direction we were headed with flood mitigation. When compared to others around the nation, it was reemphasized that we were very fortunate to have a dedicated funding source, but it also showed us that we had some of the most sophisticated floodplain maps in the country out there. So we were really on the right track with flooding. The only thing that really changed after our 2002 business plan was that it identified the need for us to become, to provide more technical support to our communities. Up until now, other than the floodplain mapping, we had really just been a financial supporter, just providing financial support, writing the checks. There was really shown a need during this planning initiative that we really needed to start reaching out and providing more technical support to the communities. We also got into research and development after that. There was shown a need to kind of allocate some funds for research and development to test out what was going on in the rest of the country, locally in Johnson County, so we could get some experience with it. And then finally, with water quality regulations on the not so far horizon and other areas of the country, we're getting more and more water quality regulations. There was a need identified to start investing more into water quality. Yeah. Exactly. Flood mitigation, and that's a good question. The question was, what does flood mitigation mean? What does it mean to reaffirm our focus on flood mitigation? Flood mitigation means the design and construction of conveyance projects, channel improvements, capacity improvement projects, trying to lower the floodplain elevation to remove homes and bridges out of the floodplain, reduce road overtopping. That's what I'm talking about when I say flood mitigation projects. Not clearing out creeks and trying to open them up for higher flow, but actually elevating bridges, increasing culverts, buying out flood-prone properties, removing them that way. All kinds of things, all kinds of projects like that we're going to get into in our next presentation. So yes, so we were on the right track with flood mitigation. 97, essentially 100% of our funding was going towards flood mitigation prior to the 2002 business plan. And after 2002, we started shaving a little bit off the top to start dabbling in some of these other areas. And at first it was very small steps, but as you can see, we really started getting into this. Communities would identify a need, and we'd say, okay, we'd ask our advisory board, is this something that would benefit all the communities? they'd say yes or no. And we say, if they said yes, we'd say, okay, well, we'll get into that business. So we got into supporting them with floodplain management. Now, we had these new floodplain boundaries, but a lot of them hadn't updated their floodplain regulations, their development ordinances. What's the proper and best practice to manage your floodplain? So we got into floodplain management. Stream setbacks were something that nobody really had in Johnson County prior to 2000s, you know, so, but there was a practice coming on nationally. So we did some research. What would a stream setback ordinance look like in Johnson County? We developed some best practices for that. Stormwater utility fees were coming online about this time. Some of the cities were looking for that local match. How are we going to come up with our 25% match? We went in and did a national survey. What's everyone doing for stormwater utilities throughout the country? What might that look like in Johnson County? So we developed a lot of model ordinances for our communities that they could then take back to their councils and say, this is the way we want to do this or that. And then we also got into updates of our local design criteria and drainage criteria, APWA manuals, things like that. Got heavily involved into that, and we still are to this day. R&D, what does that look like? Well, all kinds of things. We've really got into, if we see something out there throughout the country that looks neat, we start and we go to our communities and say, do you want to try that? Should we try that here? So we have an extensive stream and rain gauge network system. We call it our Stormwatch system. I think we have about 104 gauges throughout the county that collect stream and or rainfall elevation data. And it's been a very valuable asset for documented flooding conditions, calibrating models, really showing where it rained. So it's a nice system to have. Tied into that now, Overland Park and some cities have flood warning systems tied into our sensors that will text you, you know, when a flooding event is occurring. It'll forecast, even do some forecasting. Or it can just be as simple as a sensor over here in the stream reaches a threshold and it turns on an amber flashing light, or a barricade or something comes down. So that you don't have to manually deploy a crew to go out there and barricade a road off in the middle of the night. You can have, it's a smart system, flood warning system that can do that for us. Looked at flood inundation mapping, looked at stream stability, geomorphology issues, and we've supported our local universities pretty well. KU and K-State, a professor will call us, say, I have a grad student looking at a project on this. Would you give us some funding? So we've funded small efforts, $25,000 to $50,000 with KU and K-State to look at everything from infiltration capacity of soils, pre and post something, looked at storm analysis procedures, updating our curve number tables, runoff coefficients, lag times, time of concentrations, coming up with new and better, more calibrated coefficients to determine accurate rainfall and runoff conditions in the county. And that's been a lot of fun. And finally, water quality focus. I remember those grad students sitting back there. I don't have Wichita State on there yet, but if anyone, you know, from anyone can call us up there, and we'd be happy to do something with the Shockers. Finally, the next effort, the third area that we've kind of have gotten into heavily since 2002 is our water quality focus. NPDES Phase 2 communities, I think in 2005, 12 of our 20 communities were issued their first National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Phase 2 permits. Probably, any show of hands here, how many of you have those Phase 2 permits? 3 or 4? Okay. Yeah, so as you know, there's 6 minimum control measures in there, so we have 20 cities. Well, the first couple that stand out are public education and outreach. Well, those right off the top, the program said we're going to satisfy those 2 requirements for everyone in the county. So we took that on, that responsibility off of our communities, and we do the public education outreach on behalf of all the NPDES communities. So that's worked out well. But we also partnered with USGS to do some baseline water quality studies. We have, you know, impaired streams, but we really wanted to kind of get a handle on where the impairments were, what those impairments looked like, so that we can have a roadmap kind of how to address them in the future. So we've invested heavily into collecting water quality data so we know where our impairments are. We helped write and update several revisions now to our local BMP manual. We use the Mid-America Regional Council BMP manual. Basically, it's tied to our post-construction runoff requirements, where we look at the pre-development conditions and the post-development conditions, and developers are required to come up with a BMP mitigation package to address and treat their runoff pre and post development. We got into that and helped the cities out quite a bit with that. Speaking of BMPs, or best management practices, a lot of these things were brand new to everyone back in 2004, 5, 6, and there weren't very many, nobody had any experience with them in Johnson County, and we were going to be asking developers to start putting these in their development starting in 2008. So we worked with the cities to come up with municipal projects where we could install these practices and get our contractors some experience, get our municipal staff some experience with these practices before we were asking developers to put them in. So we funded all kinds of demonstration projects: porous pavement, hydrodynamic separators, bioretention cells, wetlands, you name it. If it's a BMP, we've probably put one in somewhere with the program dollars. And not all of them have been a success. I have about a 1 acre parking lot next to our office that was supposedly supposed to be porous. Well, the aggregate companies didn't really know how to make the mix, and they poured what we thought was a porous pavement parking lot. Well, the infiltration capacity is essentially the same as this floor here. So all the runoff runs down to the end of the parking lot and pools in this big lake and goes over the curb into the creek. So we were working on retrofitting that situation, but that was 10 years ago, or probably 7 or 8 years ago now, and it was a good lesson learned. We worked with the Concrete Management Institute and come up with better mixes, better designs, and better standards for their mixes. So we really have helped advance that. Another thing on there is adaptive management and continuous simulation. There's technology out there where you can go back in and retrofit existing detention ponds and put smart controls on the outlets of those ponds so that you can draw them down in anticipation of a rainfall event, so that you can get a better capture, or you can hold back water for longer time. So you can take your existing infrastructure, detention ponds that were never sized for or designed to do any water quality treatment. They basically pass through all the low flows go straight through them. We can go back into those and take them and retrofit them to get some water quality improvement out of them. So we've got a couple of those sites online now as well. So at this point, we're a pretty mature program, and you kind of have a flavor for the types and kinds of projects that we fund. So thought it might be helpful for you guys if I walked you through a typical annual budget for our program so you can see exactly how we allocate our funding for the year. This is the exact same presentation that I give our county commissioners every year. So it'll give you an idea of exactly how we do it. Before I take this to our Board of County Commissioners, it's been approved and ran through our Stormwater Management Advisory Council. So the 20-city board gets to weigh in on it first and make recommendations, and then we take it to our Board of County Commissioners. So put yourself in a county commissioner's seat for a second. Some of you don't have to stretch to do that, but this table gives you an overview of the entire program. At the top, you can see the total funds available for 2017 at just $23.8 million. This is a combination of revenue generated from the countywide 1/10 of a cent sales tax and carryover from previous years' unspent funds. Unspent funds are a combination of projects closing out under budget and previous year's excess revenues. We haven't had very much excess revenue. Our budget office is pretty good at forecasting that for us, but we do have projects close out under budget or projects get canceled completely by the cities. So we get a lot of money, and we're working on this issue. We're trying to eliminate these unspent funds or these carryover from previous years, but it's something that we deal with. Below that is a summary of our expenditures by program area. Approximately $20.5 million of that is going towards design and construction of flood damage reduction projects shown in yellow. I'll go through, I'll show you where those are located next. So 88% of that's going towards design and construction of flood control. So the lion's share of the budget is still going towards flooding, and approximately 2.2 million or 10% is going towards our regional and support projects. Those are the things I just highlighted, our technical support. I'll go through those next too. And the remaining 4% or 573,000 is, or actually 2% is all, looks like, is for staff salaries, program administration. We currently fund today, 27 years later, we have 2.8 FTEs. Myself, a water quality specialist, half of Sarah's time and a third of another person's time. So 2.8 FTEs. We're still run a lean ship at the county. We do a lot of work, but I'll show you how we do all this work. It's not all done by us. But that's our operating budget. In total, 98% of our budget is going towards projects with the cities in one form or another. And at the bottom, we have $531,000 of unobligated funds. That'll be carried over towards next year in our next 2018 program. So this is the list of capital improvement projects that I mentioned that we intend to fund with the cities in 2017. You'll see we'll be funding 7 different projects in 4 different cities. Again, this is a 75-25% split. So the county share there you're seeing is only 75% of the total construction costs. There's an additional 25% match that the cities come up with. So you see, I mentioned 20 cities. How many cities do you see listed there? 1, 2, 3, 4 cities. 4 cities are really the only ones that are going to be benefiting from the program next year. And we have no issue with that. Our board realizes that that's where the money needs to go. They have their match, they're ready to move forward with their projects. Our time may come when we have a project eligible. It really comes back to that minimum eligibility criteria. If your project scores 100 points, it gets on the list and it will eventually get funded. So year to year, we don't have this infighting or these communities competing over these dollars. So it's worked well. You see, Shawnee was a large benefactor. They have a little over $12 million of the $20.5 million. They actually went out and bonded their 25% match. They saw construction costs were going up. This project is on Neiman. It's a project, a large project that's broken up into 3 segments. This project is so large that they were able to break it up into 3 separate projects, 100-point projects, and obviously you would obviously want to construct them from downstream to upstream, so you're not flooding anyone downstream. But they actually, their board or their county city council went ahead and just went out and got bonds and came up with their $12 million or their match of the $12 million. So you can see kind of the range here from. I didn't show the footnote up there, but Leawood, the very first project, has an asterisk by it because they just elected to do design only in 2017. So we allow cities to phase projects. They can design 1 year and then move into construction the subsequent year. Or you can do design and construction all in 1 year. But, the $724,000, we have projects that are $300,000 projects all the way up to $6.8 million and larger. Some of the projects on our list have been over $10 million before. So it gives you an idea kind of the types of projects. Sarah's got a couple of great examples of what these projects look like with graphs and stuff that she's going to go into her presentation. Here's a map showing the location of those 7 projects in the county. As you can see, they're kind of randomly scattered. They're not, the watersheds would be better to show on here because they're not municipally based on municipalities. Here's our regional support projects. This is where we get those technical support things and water quality efforts. We're budgeting $510,000 for our NPDS Phase 2 services. That's the public education and outreach that I mentioned. Also, $100,000 for illicit discharge detection and elimination. And that goes to fund our 2 county HHW collection facilities or give them a grant, $50,000 to both HHW collection facilities. There's a direct correlation between proper disposal of HHW and water quality, stormwater runoff, so we use program dollars for that. We do the TMDL monitoring for the cities. So we have budget in there for that, and then just $30,000 for general NPDS support. Below that is our support projects, $500,000 of engineering support. We have 9 firms on term and supply, 9 engineering firms that we can call up based on our need and say, can you guys look at this for us? Can you do this study for us? Can you do that? We basically use those 9 firms as an extension of our own staff. So that's how we're able to do so much with such little overhead, I guess, at the county level, so many little FTE, lower FTEs. $500,000 for studies, $300,000 for regional and R&D, $325,000 for that storm and rain gauge system, and then $100,000 for USGS stream flow gauges. And finally, this is the current list of projects eligible for future funding. These are the projects that are on the list. They have a 100-point minimum. They meet the 100-point minimum, and they'll be funded in subsequent years as when the cities are ready to move forward with them. And these are just the projects identified by the cities to date. This is no means a comprehensive list of the flooding problems in the county, but we continue to add. Cities all the time are pursuing new projects. As they mark off some of their other priorities, they go ahead and pursue, okay, now we can go down to this next lower priority project. So we're working through this list in the county, so we still have $30 million today identified. We think this number is probably closer to $200 to $300 million of problems yet to fund. I know there's large efforts, what we call boat anchor projects, that cities know that they're not going to have their match, or that they don't even have on the list, so they don't even submit them to us at this point. So note here that there's only 4 cities on this list. Again, getting back to that equity thing, we're seeing, and we'll get into this next, is that what we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years is that this is becoming only 4 or 5 cities are benefiting from our program. They're the ones that had the worst flooding, and they're continuing to be the benefactors now of our program. And there's a lot of other stormwater needs in the county, but the way the program is currently set up, these cities are the ones that are getting the lion's share of the funding at this point. So we're right back to where we started. Sure, we got new floodplain maps today. We're providing more technical support and other funding for water quality and R&D. But by and large, the program and the majority of the funding hasn't changed in almost 27 years. And it's been a good program. And some can say that it's been a great program. I mean, we really have solved a lot of flooding problems. We've made a lot of investment. I said $270 million over 27 years doesn't count for the $90 million in match, so it's closer to $360 million of investment in stormwater in the last 3 decades. But as our supervisor would say, don't let good be the enemy of great. So we started hearing, we haven't been creating any new flooding problems. We have these maps that have been forecasting out in the future. We know where we can build structures, so we're not creating any additional liabilities, but we're still solving the flooding problems of the past. But more recently, we're starting to hear things like, I'd like to pursue that project this year, but our entire budget just got ate up by emergency repair to a failing pipe. So Shawnee had something like a 6-foot diameter corrugated metal pipe fail under a road. Well, the road happened to be the road for the Johnson County landfill, and it was like 40 feet underneath the road bed. There's a $750 million emergency, or $750,000 emergency repair. So, aging infrastructure. We're starting to get more and more requests, or more cities are seeing their stormwater utility dollars not go towards flooding because it's getting eaten up by system replacement projects. Another thing we're starting to hear is that, so failing pipes. We're starting to hear things like stream stability issues. We have to solve this erosion problem because it's threatening some public infrastructure dollars over here. We can't do any flooding this year because we're working on stream stability. Or, it rains so hard that, we have new flooding areas popped up that we never knew were a problem before, that maybe our models weren't detailed enough to catch. If you've been following the news, Indian Creek experienced the flood of record on, I think, July 27th. And the stream gauge had been there for, I don't know, I think since the early 80s. So it had crested and experienced the flood of record since our gauge was installed, and that was subsequently broken by 2 feet on August 5th. So, more and more flooding, new areas of flooding. So maybe the projects that they have up there right now, Overland Park has, as many of you know, you get phone calls from residents. Now we have a new problem area. That's no longer our priority. We need to fix this problem over here first. So we're getting, then the list goes on. We hear from our state and feds that we need to start doing more for water quality. Our NPDES permits are going to start addressing TMDLs. So same pot of money, but more and more needs to be met. So enter strategic planning process number 2. And this is kind of shared with you our past and up to the point of today where we're really, the program is what he's done, and this is going to kind of be the future of what we want to go. So we recognized again that our program needed to evolve, and we decided to make a concerted effort to reevaluate, how the program provides value to our stakeholders, the residents of Johnson County, and whether we were still doing that effectively. 3 main components of this strategic planning exercise is, again, we're a national benchmarking exercise to see what the best management practices were again, a gap analysis between what we were providing and what those national best management practices were, and then strategy formulation. How can we close those gaps between what we're providing today and what the national best practice, state of the practice is? And again, as many of you know, stormwater management is a rapidly evolving field, and a lot can change in 10 years. What was considered state of the practice 10 years ago is not considered state of the practice today, much less 14 years since we've done a strategic plan. It's just too long to go without reevaluating the direction of our program, we found. So we essentially took the pulse on the national practice in stormwater management through our benchmarking exercise, and we identified these trends nationally, things that are probably likely on your mind today and that you're probably already addressing to some degree already. Many programs, including our own, focus the majority of their funding and resources on the one thing that's actually not on this list, and that's flooding. But what we found nationwide is that these issues and how they are intertwined must be considered in addition to flooding for successful stormwater management moving forward. And it goes beyond just simple water quality versus water quality concerns. We were pleased during halfway through this process when WERF, the Water Environment Federation, released its report, Rainfall to Results, and it highlighted some of these same major concerns as national concerns. So we were on the right track. Stormwater is no different than the rest of our infrastructure and is in need of major reinvestment. Corrugated metal pipe, did you guys put in a lot of that? Yeah, we have a lot of that in Johnson County. And it's all about that 75 years old now. One city, I think, Overland Park, banned it a long time ago. They don't have any corrugated metal pipe issues. But a lot of cities do. So, asset management. It's traditionally lagged asset management for other more engineered systems like drinking water and stormwater. However, the concepts of asset management for those can play right into stormwater as well. The most fundamental shift our program is going to be undertaking is a shift to a true watershed-based organization. And this is absolutely emerging as a best practice nationally. And if you guys are considering doing this, setting this up to be a true watershed-based approach would be what I would recommend. This is in contrast to the municipally focused solutions that did not consider the watershed as a whole. Sure, we've mapped we have models and maps of the whole watershed, but our program leaves it up to the cities to initiate those projects and come up with solutions in their jurisdiction. Well, as you can see, as you know, what one city does upstream can impact cities downstream. We have a downstream community sign-off requirement, but still, the best solution for your flooding problem may be upstream in another community, or maybe a combination of home buyouts in your community and infrastructure improvements upstream. So that's where we're headed, is true watershed-based approach. So we're going to be investing in the discovery phase next and do watershed master plans essentially, and come up with the list of priority projects that the county wants to get involved in. So, you know, it might seem obvious to some, but it's a fundamental shift for our program with 20 major cities and 3 river basins. Not to mention, we're part of a large metropolitan area with the Kansas City Metro that has 15 counties and 119 cities. And this really comes into play when you talk about water quality. You just cannot simply address water quality issues on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. It truly does also needs to be a watershed-based approach. We need to all work together collectively to solve these problems. And finally, funding. Even though we've been very fortunate to have this funding source, we've done a very poor job of trying to leverage additional outside funding. Other than the 25% match that we require by the cities, in our national search, we found that other communities are doing a much better job of bringing in other state and federal sources. I know a lot of that money is tight, hard to get to, and might become with strings attached, but it is out there, and so we're looking at other alternative funding sources, trying to bring those in. So, we're taking a step back to think about our program from a national perspective, strategically. We think we're going to we hope, and we know, I think we will be able to provide more value to our stakeholders in the long run and move us from, or hopefully prevent us from becoming that reactive program again, where every time it rains, we have sinkholes forming in parking lots and pipes failing and roads being closed. We need to get out in front of this stuff again so that we aren't that reactive program where, why weren't you doing this 10 years ago type approach. We think it's going to provide better public safety, increased operational efficiency, improved water quality in the environment, and better long-term fiscal stewardship for our taxpayers. So how are we going to deliver the benefits? We're going to continue, obviously, to address flooding throughout the county, but we're incorporating system replacement projects and water quality improvement projects into our funding right alongside flooding. So you'll see our budget might look much different in coming years. It may have a line item for flooding, a line item for system replacement. That's going to bring in a lot of those smaller cities that might not have or may not want to pursue or may not have any flooding issues, but they've got tens of millions of dollars worth of system replacement projects and aging infrastructure projects. So we're looking at helping cities invest in that and system replacing, bringing their systems up to a certain level of service and a certain life expectancy. We're also, in order to do that, we're going to be investing heavily in a countywide stormwater asset management program. Some cities are very far along in this. They have their whole systems mapped. They have condition assessment. They have an inventory. Some cities have nothing. So we're going to help cities bring everyone up to a certain platform and create a database at the county level so that we can compare apples to apples so that we know that we're putting our dollars to the highest need. And so we're fixing all the level 5 pipe first. And then once we get all that fixed, we can move on to the next thing. Something that we've never dabbled in before, and so it's going to be a huge learning curve for us as well. The shift to a watershed-based organization is not going to be a smooth transition either. So we're trying to manage that through a bunch of public and professional outreach. I guess, remember, in the past we funded projects based on the priorities of the cities. And we're moving to a needs-based program, the true priority of the watershed. Let's put our dollars where the needs are, not where the cities say their problems are. So we're looking at investing in that discovery phase again, and trying to kind of further prioritize our investment. And so that's not going to be easy. So now we've divided the county up into 6 watersheds that will have a smaller version of the Stormwater Management Advisory Council. It may have, say there's 6 cities. They'll have to work together to come up with which project do they want to pursue this year and get buy-in from all their communities. And that project may be in one city, and the other 5 cities are going to have to support that somehow. And how are we going to work through that? How are we going to get funding? How are they going to share funding? But that's the only way we can really truly do this, I think, in the future. So nobody said it was going to be easy. So that's where we're headed. And basically, it comes down to diversification. We took the national pulse on stormwater. we realized that we needed to diversify to kind of meet the needs of everyone in the county. So we're reallocating our, our resources accordingly and hopefully improving the quality of life for our residents, properly stewarding tax dollars, and meeting our water quality regulations in the meantime. So I shared with you the history of our program and touched on our goals and aspirations moving forward. So where does that leave you? I know my predecessor was down here 8 years ago and gave a very similar talk. Where will you guys be in 5 or 10 years? Funding is key, as you guys know. And we're very, very, very fortunate to have that funding source. Somebody asked me earlier, what is I've shared with you what a tenth of a cent sales tax can generate. A mill in Johnson County generates $9 million. I know there's other funding sources out there we've looked at when we did our strategic plan. We've looked into some other approaches, so I can share those with you. And I'll just leave you with this, that change is hard. Nobody forced us, nobody forced us to do this. I mean, we were doing a great program. All of you guys are probably doing, running successful programs, or you probably wouldn't have jobs today. But we can always do better. We can always elevate our program. The easy thing is to just continue with the status quo. We could have continued to crank the wheel for another 10 years and continued down the path we were on, but we would have been that much farther behind in system replacement and water quality and other things. So key thing was our initial investment in our watershed studies and updating our floodplains and models. So I guess my challenge is to take a look at your guys' programs and the systems, strategies, and structures of your organization and ask yourself the question, why do we do things the way we do? Is there a better way? Is there overlap with other departments, agencies, cities, counties? If we were all work together, could we leverage our resources, leverage more resources if we work together? So I'm going to quit there. I've talked long enough. That was a long presentation for me. So, and open it up to you guys for any questions. I think we have time, right, Susan? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The question was preventing people from building in the floodplain. So the first step is to having accurate floodplains. So if you don't know where your floodplain boundaries are, you don't have, or if your maps are grossly outdated, the first step is to update those maps so you get a true delineation of the current and maybe even the future forecasted floodplain elevation. So that's your first step. The second step comes into robust floodplain management regulations, and that's going to have to be, regulations on do you allow platting in the floodplain? Do you allow platting in the floodway? Do you allow fill? Things like that. And it comes down to economics and political will. I mean, how willing is your municipality, your city, your county? How bad do they want that development versus that floodplain, Yeah, it's still with the city. Yep. But we strongly encourage, and we develop those model ordinances so that it levels the playing field. Sure, there's always going to be exceptions and variances to the rule. But did you need to say something too? But having a model ordinance, and so that it gives your political elected officials cover, so they know that the standard is going to be in our community is the same as it might be over here. So they can't just, they'd allow us to do that over here in Lenexa, so why won't you let us do it here? I'm going to go to Lenexa if you don't let me do it here. So having a uniform floodplain regulations helps a lot too. Sarah?
Each of the cities are their own floodplains to live on.
No, it's not.
Basically, the cities can do what they want. They're their own floodplain administrators. In unincorporated Johnson County, we don't allow construction in the floodplain unless you do the engineering analysis to prove that you're not causing a rise in the floodplain. So we do have the floodplain and development permit application that people have to go through and submit to us with documentation of the effects that it has. And if you do cause a rise, you have to do a FEMA submittal, and you also have to have buy-off from anybody that you're affecting, like a downstream property owner, or you can't go through with the project. So it can be done, but there's a lot of red tape to do that.
Go ahead.
A couple, I guess, right-of-way based questions. So do you fund any projects that are not in public right-of-way or public easement? I don't know, yes.
Yes.
Needs to be improved.
Absolutely. Oh, the question, okay. Do we fund projects that are not in a public easement or public right-of-way? By much like Sedgwick County, all of our streams back up to private property owners. And a lot of the properties that we're trying to protect are adjacent to streams. So we'll go in and the cities will do permanent or temporary construction easements, get their equipment in there, get the project constructed, and then they usually require a dedicated easement after that so that they can have access to maintain it. But all kinds of things. One thing I didn't mention was home buyouts. Sarah's going to go into this, but we come up with a solution. It has to be a complete solution. It has to solve the flood, the house flooding and the street flooding if there's both on the project. Well, it doesn't make much sense to spend $2.5 million to save a $250,000 house. So we buy homes routinely and demolish them and take them out with our projects as well. So we buy private property and with our projects all the time as well.
Do you fund right-of-way purchases that are needed for projects, or is that up to the city?
Yes, we do. I'm remembering this on we have a similar program for our county roads projects, and we do not fund the right-of-way acquisition on that. But for we fund right-of-way acquisition, property acquisition, buying houses, and if the only time.
You'll fund every phase of a project.
Every phase of a project. Yeah, we want the projects to be successful, whatever it takes to make that project successful. Yeah. Go ahead.
We live in a small town, and we have a drainage operation outside of town. I don't know if you have a situation such as this, but they dug a ditch a long time ago and really corrected a lot of things. Well, the ditch hasn't been touched in over 30, 40 years, and now those same problems are starting to show up again. Is that something that, even though it's not inside the city limits, that would be addressed with something like this?
Yeah, so the unincorporated area of Johnson County, we just treat them just like another city. So Johnson County, unincorporated Johnson County can apply for a improvement project just like any city could. And I don't know the specifics, but it would have to make the 100-point program. So that would have to have either road overtopping over 7 inches based on and a certain frequency and severity for that, or home flooding. We wouldn't just go in and do routine maintenance, or say the system's been neglected for 30 years, and now it has. We get calls all the time from property owners saying, "I had a bunch of debris come down the stream and it's choked this up, it's plugged it. Who's going to come in and clean that up?" We don't do anything like that. We never get involved with channel clearing out capacity or channels. Cities do that some, but not for our program. We don't get involved with that.
When you say you buy homes routinely, you do that from this budget. You don't wait for the federal and state agencies to have funding in their budget for buying houses.
No. After that 98 storm, we had a federal disaster declaration, and then we got some FEMA money to help purchase, I think, 25 homes after that flood. We haven't had one of those in recent years. So those are bought out as part of those 7 projects that we're funding this year that may incorporate 4 or 5 home buyouts in those. So, yeah, it comes out of our annual budget. One of the things I didn't mention in our moving forward, what we've heard a lot is that it would be very advantageous if we had a voluntary home buyout program, just a standalone pot of money, so that if homes do come up for sale that are in a floodplain, the cities can go in at that time when they're up for sale and voluntarily buy those people out. rather than, the city knows that it has a project going there, but they're not ready to do it for 4 or 5 years. Well, that house comes up for sale. The project's on the books, but it's not ready yet. They have to sell, they sell to a new, unknowing homeowner possibly that this project is coming down the line, and then we have to displace those people after they've only lived there for a year or two. So we are moving forward, or the plan is in the future to have a voluntary home buyout program, pot of money set aside to do that kind of acquisition in the future.
Kind of another question. If, let's say all the demographics and everything around the city has changed through the years, would inside the city, funding be there designed to incorporate some of these other things outside the city causing the same problems that are on the county? With the flooding.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Okay. Outside the city, it's changed a lot. Okay, the farms and everything, demographics and everything changed. Do you have any kind of funding in your area where the city can plan, redo, in order to incorporate things so the things outside are no longer affecting the city the way they're doing?
So development is occurring, you're getting, so I think the question is, you're getting things in the unincorporated area of the county. Can the county influence that so that it doesn't flood somebody downstream?
No, I'm talking about I'm talking about the city replanning its drainage operation to where it can incorporate whatever needs, because everything around the city has changed. The city can have some funds to redo it, to adapt to what.
Yeah, it's essentially, so can the city utilize these funds to redo their system to accommodate the larger flows? That's essentially what our program is all about. A lot of our project programs are with cities that when the system was designed 50 years ago, it was adequate, but since then, the watershed now is fully developed, and that little bridge over the little babbling brook that was sufficient 50 years ago is no longer. It gets inundated every time. Or, channels, we do channel widening, deepening, culvert replacement, bridge replacement, all kinds of capacity improvement projects on their systems to reduce and alleviate flooding and the dangers associated with that.
The city engineer starts.
Yep, so cities would, either through a modeled scenario shown on our models or a documented case of flooding, they would go after, they would put together what's called a preliminary engineering study. The city would probably reach out to an engineering firm and say, we have a procedure that they have to go through to do a preliminary study to assess whether or not it's going to qualify for our program funding. If we say yes, it looks like it's a valid project, then they go through a much more detailed study and submit to us 3 alternatives to solve the flooding and then a cost estimate associated with those alternatives, and we fund to the lowest cost alternative. So, yep. Go ahead.
If a project is proposed in the unincorporated part of the county has to come up with the 25% cost share.
Correct.
Yeah, the question was, does the county have to come, if a project occurs in the unincorporated county, do they have to come up with their cost share matches? And yes, they do. They're just treated like any other city. Even though we are Johnson County, we treat them just like another city.
It doesn't come out of this budget, though. It comes out of our general funds.
Well, okay, but how do they, if you're doing a city project, the city's got the ability to tax its citizens to create the revenue for paying their costs. Does the county have a mechanism to tax the unincorporated portion of the county, or are people in the cities paying that too because it's a countywide assessment?
So everyone in the county, it's a countywide sales tax. So if you just drive through Johnson County and you buy gas or anything at a retailer, you're paying into the stormwater fund. Johnson County, unincorporated Johnson County's 25% match just comes out of the public works budget, for road maintenance, or their budget for public works, essentially. So whatever the county commissioners allocated for Johnson County Public Works that year, they have to say, okay, we're not going to mill and overlay on this part, or we're not going to chip seal as many roads this year because we're going to actually do this bridge project. And we do quite a few of them in the unincorporated Johnson County. We've done half a dozen probably. So they just have to plan for that accordingly and use their general fund money that they get. Yeah, go ahead.
In your new business plan where you're shifting the focus to asset management, do you have a separate set of criteria, or has that been developed yet? Do you have minimum criteria for a design storm, per se, or a different 100-point system qualify for compare projects for a remediation or prevention type of project versus asset management, restoration type of project?
So the question was our asset management focus that we're moving forward with. How are we going to prioritize that? Are we going to have design standards? We're working, we have 6 implementation subcommittees. We have a subcommittee comprised of city representatives that are fluent in asset management, more fluent than I am, to come up with what does an asset management or system replacement project look like for the county? How far up in the drainage, or how far the conveyance system are we going to fund? I mean, do we go up to 24-inch pipes, 12-inch pipes, 36-inch pipes? So how far up in the system do we go? When we replace that corrugated metal pipe, what do we allow them to put back in? Obviously, we're not going to allow them to put corrugated metal pipe back in there. So we're going to have a materials requirement that they can use, what kind of type of material, and then we'll also possibly say, look at conveyance, but it wouldn't make much sense for them to size it, so say they put the system into size for a 25-year storm, is common, or even 10 years, why would we make them put in a 50-year system if it's just going to tie into a 20-year system downstream? So we're working through all those details of what they have to replace with, and what system replacement's going to look like. All right.
Let's thank Lee for coming here and talking.
No problem, guys.
All right, the next part of the program is presented by Sarah Smith, who's the stormwater engineer for Johnson County. Please help me welcome Sarah.
Good morning. My presentation will not be nearly as long. I expect this to be more of a question and answer sort of session. So the slides are pretty high level, not terribly descriptive. I am also a KU graduate, like Lee over here. I actually got my undergrad in architectural engineering and then decided to do a turn and get my master's in civil engineering with an emphasis in water resources. So I've been doing that ever since. I worked for a private consulting firm for 9 years and came to the county about 4 years ago. I'm actually shared resource between the stormwater management program and public works. So I do a lot of our in-house culvert replacement projects for that group, and then I also work on the stormwater management program. I do a lot of the review that comes in for these projects, so I'm kind of going to step through a project, how a project would be implemented from beginning to end. So from when we get the application to when we do go to construction. This is sort of just an overview. It starts with the city identifying a particular project they want to implement. As Lee has mentioned, Lee has already gone over some of this in his presentation. The 100-point minimum is required to get a project funded. After we've determined that the project qualifies, we'll go to the preliminary engineering study, which will have 3 alternatives in it. After the PES is approved, we go to the PEFF list, which is the projects eligible for future funding. And then we sort the project based on the cost-benefit ratio. And again, we fund 75% of the project cost, and the city matches the 25%. And then once the project goes to construction, the city will take over those projects and is responsible for maintenance. So project identification comes in various ways. The city usually brings them to us. If it's a county project, our public works department will bring it to us. different ways they identify them. A lot of it is floodplain mapping. If the structures show to be in the floodplain on the map, it is eligible for funding. A lot of times city staff go out, and a lot of resident reports as well. They call in, say my basement's flooding, and city staff will have to go out and verify that. Now, how do we get to the 100 points? The flood problem rating table is our go-to tool that we use. This is kind of an overview. I had to chop it up to make it fit on the slide. And the top portion of it is the various flooding-related problems that points can be assigned to, such as loss of life, flooding of inhabitable buildings, street flooding, erosion, and then there's a couple on the bottom there where if other cities receive benefit, you earn extra points for those. And then those bottom two tables are the frequency and severity multipliers. So for a project, depending on the severity and frequency of flooding, the multipliers are applied to those numbers, and you get more points that way. So once we determine that the project qualifies, we then approve funding of the study. We approve funding of the preliminary engineering study. The cities will go out and hire an engineering consultant to do this study, typically. A few cities have engineering staff and they'll do it in-house, but most of the time a consultant is brought in. And the PES, we require a lot of different information in it, like existing conditions, background info, permit requirements, but really the meat and potatoes of the study are the three alternatives. They can be completely different. However, one of the alternatives must contain the home buyouts, because it doesn't make economical sense to spend $3 million on a house that's worth $500,000. So we put that in as a cost comparison, and our funding is limited to the lowest cost of those three alternatives. We've had cities who have chosen to do a different alternative, but they would have to pick up the difference in cost if they choose to do that. And a lot of times it happens if the home buyouts happen to be the lowest cost solution, but people don't want to move and it's not politically favorable, they'll choose to do another solution, but the city will have to do the difference, pick up the difference. And I kind of went over this already. All the projects that qualify and where we approve the PES will be put on the PFF list, which is projects eligible for future funding. I always say that wrong. And we fund the lowest cost solution, like I said, 25% SMP funding, 25% city project cost sharing for design and construction. And then, like Lee has already gone over, the projects are prioritized by cost benefit. And this is what the big version of the table looks like that Lee has already showed you. So this is our complete list. This is our current list. He had an outdated one. This is our current list of all the projects that are eligible for funding. You can see some of them have been on there since 2000. The city of Overland Park has just never been able to come up with a match, or they just haven't prioritized that project. So that one, they may end up canceling at some point. It's been on there for a really long time. And there's various reasons why the cities will accept or decline funding. In the spring, Lee typically starts calling the cities and goes down the list to offer funding, and they will accept or decline for that year. If they decline funding, it'll move up to next year's list. It doesn't get booted or anything like that. It just goes to the next year. And then, yeah, he will just go down the list until all of our available funds are allocated. And sometimes, what? Oh, the contingency, okay. So we have a contingency built in. It's 10% of the total project cost, and that allows for change orders without us having to go back to the board and ask for money. And, yeah, yes.
On the, like the 2000 project, would they have to update their engineering study?
Yes.
Okay.
Most likely, they would have to do an updated.
If they want to do it, they got to bring in the numbers.
Yeah, and we have some cities who have, Shawnee does this really well, actually, that every year their project is on the list, they'll give us an updated cost, and we update the numbers. So that's really nice. That Overland Park project, I don't think will ever happen in my lifetime, so, yes.
How are the engineering studies paid for?
I'm sorry, can you say that?
How are the preliminary engineering studies paid for? Is that 25?
Yes, the question was how the PESs are paid for, and that's built into our study budget. We have a budget just for PESs, and I think it's $500,000. Is that right? $500,000. And, you know, sometimes we get through the whole list. We offer funding to everybody. Sometimes sometimes we don't get to the bottom of the list. It just depends on the year. And then all the cities that do accept funding will make up our capital projects list for that year. And right now, it looks like this. I think it's probably this is the one for next year, I believe. Yeah, because it doesn't have Shawnee on it. And like I said, there's various reasons the city may or may not accept funding, and a lot of times they don't have the match available that year. They don't have the public support, or the urgency isn't there, or they accept the funding because it is there. So it's different. And and then once the PES is finished and approved by me, we go to design and construction, and the city will retain a consultant. A lot of times it's the same consultant that did the PES, but not always. It doesn't have to be. And a contractor for design and construction. We provide cursory reviews, and it's just to make sure it meets our requirement. I don't check math, I don't check the engineering. It's just to make sure that those key elements are there, that it meets our APWA 5600, for example. And you know, the flooding is less than 7 inches and all those things that we require. And then once the project is constructed, it goes to the city. It's a city project. So this is what a typical SMP project, we get all kinds of projects, but this is about typically what I get. It's an undersized storm sewer system, flooding out 3 homes that you can see in yellow there, street flooding at that crossing on Hemlock Street, and they want to upgrade the storm sewer system, and I don't know if you can see the table real well, but they have a frequency multiplier of 2 right there for the flooding of the home, and that's because it floods at a 5-year event. So they were able to multiply that 40 points by 2 to get 80 points, and then with the addition of that 1.5 times the street flooding, then they were able to get above the 110 points, and it qualified for our funding. And then this is a much, much different project that we funded. It's Meadowbrook Park, where a developer actually bought out a golf course and was trying to turn it into a multi-use development. Shopping and retail, and then the city had a stipulation that for him to do that, he'd have to turn part of that into a park. And so we worked with Johnson County Parks and Rec, and we funded the expansion of those detention basins, and it actually took 10 homes out of the floodplain. So this is kind of a bigger map of that. You can see Meadowbrook Park at the top there. And then where it's hard to see, those little green boxes are all the houses that project ended up taking out of the floodplain just by expanding those detention basins and doing some stream improvements upstream. But we only paid for the stormwater portion of this. We didn't pay for the development or anything like that. So that's one of our most recent, pretty successful projects. And this project was also multi-jurisdictional because it went through Prairie Village and Overland Park. Most of the benefit was actually in Overland Park, because that's where all the homes were. So, that's all I had. That's kind of from beginning to end, but I'm happy to answer lots of questions. Yes?
On the last one, we're multi-jurisdictional, how are the cities dividing up their 25%?
Prairie Village paid for it all, I think. Is that right? Yeah, since it was a Prairie Village project, Prairie Village provided the match and just got Overland Parks, had to sign off on it, which they were more than happy to do since they got to take 10 homes out of their floodplain. So, yes?
Downstream sign off, and that has to happen, can you walk us through where that happens in this process?
Yeah, so it can happen as early as when they request the PES, depending on where the project is. If they know it's for sure going to impact somebody, another jurisdiction downstream, they would request a letter to send to us. All of our cities work really well together. We rarely have a problem with this. But by our policy, the downstream receiving city has the right to review the PES to make sure it's not impacting them. And if they don't want to go through with it, then the project can't go forward.
With our funding.
Right, with our funding. But we have not had that happen, I don't think. Oh, we've had it happen once.
Do you get involved with the selection of the firms that are doing the PESs?
No, we do not. The question was if we get involved with the selection of the firms, and we don't. The cities hire their own, whoever they want.
They'll take whoever it is?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it has to be a licensed engineer. Right, but yeah. And I review the PES, so if there's something in there, I don't, I look at them, make sure they meet our standards. Yes?
Do a lot of your projects involve working with FEMA?
Some do. If we're doing a project in the floodplain, yes. But I don't deal with that myself. The city will, because all the cities are their own floodplain administrators.
So there's not a timeline specific. You don't have to complete the project by a certain date in order to get your 75%. You can wait on FEMA and FEMA permits.
How does that work? I don't pay the bills.
The list of the funding, like for 2017, we like the project to just design, initiate it, and hopefully go to construction in 2017. But these projects actually typically span over a year and a half to 2 years sometimes. And then specific to FEMA, if it is changing the regulatory floodplain, we require a LOMR submittal.
Right, yeah.
And they have to go ahead and go through with that and update our floodplain maps and models.
Yes.
I guess I'll follow up a little bit on that. So, you would approve the 2018 project, for example, and that might be designed and implemented construction. Is there a timeline when it has to be done, or is it pretty open-ended?
No, if you decline funding, it'll stay on our list for the next year until you cancel the project.
Well, I'm saying you initiate the project, you approve the project.
Mm-hmm.
Funding is set aside, and if it's a big project, it's 2 years before it closes out. Am I not making?
Like you accept funding for the project, but then it takes 2 years to get it done.
Right. You set aside 2018 money, and I might not get done until 2020. You're okay with that?
We okay with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
We get into core permitting issues and things get held up for various reasons. As long as the city's making a good faith effort to continue to move the project forward, we're fine. We may check in with them every 6 months saying, what's the status on this project? Are you still making progress? And just a written response saying, yeah, we are moving forward. We intend to move forward. This is the reason why it's being held up. And we just let them go.
Do you have a project-specific agreement on everyone's projects with the city?
Yeah.
Yes. Anything else? Okay.
This is your chance. The experts here.
All right, go for that. Thanks.